Ecology against nature. Do we not today once again need such a shattering experience of negativity? That is to say, what if the true choice today were between fear and terror? The expression fear and trembling assumes the identity of the two terms, as if they point towards the two aspects of the same phenomenon. What if, however, one has to introduce a gap between the two, so that trembling, being terrorized, is, at its most radical, the only true opposition to fear? In other words, one can break out of this fear not through a desperate search for safety, but, on the contrary, by pushing on to the end, by accepting the nullity of that which we are afraid to lose. Isaac Asimov said somewhere that there are two possibilities. Either we are alone in the universe, there is nobody out there watching us, or there is somebody out there. And both possibilities are equally unbearable. So, from the fear of losing our anchorage in the big other, we should pass to the terror of there being no big other. The old formula, there is nothing to fear but fear itself, acquires thus a new and unexpected meaning. The fact that there is nothing to fear is the most terrifying fact imaginable. Terror is this self-related or self-negated fear. It is what fear changes into once we accept that there is no way back, that what we are afraid to lose, what is threatened by what we are afraid of, nature, the life world, the symbolic substance of our community, has always already been lost. This terror, whose contours Hegel outlined in his description of the servant's subjective experience of encountering the threat of death, should serve us as the background against which one should read Marx and Engels' famous description of the capitalist dynamic in the Communist Manifesto. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures, there arises a world literature. Is this not, more than ever, our reality today? Ericsson phones are no longer Swedish. Toyota cars are manufactured 60% in the USA. Hollywood culture pervades the remotest parts of the globe. Furthermore, does the same not go also for forms of ethnic and sexual identity? Should we not supplement Marx's description in this sense, adding that also sexual one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible? That concerning sexual practices, it is also true that all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned. So that capitalism tends to replace standard normative heterosexuality with a proliferation of unstable shifting identities and or orientations. And today, with the latest biogenetic developments, we are entering a new phase in which it is simply nature itself which melts into air. The main consequence of the scientific breakthroughs in biogenetics is the end of nature. Once we know the rules of its construction, natural organisms are transformed into objects amenable to manipulation. Nature, human and inhuman, is thus desubstantialized, deprived of its impenetrable density, of what Heidegger called earth. This compels us to give a new twist to Freud's title, Unbehagen in der Kultur, discontent, uneasiness, in culture. With the latest developments, the discontent shifts from culture to nature itself. Nature is no longer natural, the reliable, dense background of our lives. It now appears as a fragile mechanism which, at any point, can explode in a catastrophic manner. Biogenetics, with its reduction of the human psyche itself to an object of technological manipulation, is therefore effectively a kind of empirical instantiation of what Heidegger perceived as the danger inherent in modern technology. Crucial here is the interdependence of man and nature. By reducing man to just another natural object whose properties can be manipulated, what we lose is not only humanity, but nature itself. In this sense, Francis Fukuyama is right. Humanity relies on some notion of human nature, as what we have inherited, as something that has simply been given to us, the impenetrable dimension of ourselves, into which we are born, thrown. The paradox is thus that there is man only insofar as there is impenetrable inhuman nature, Heidegger's earth. With the prospect of biogenetic interventions opened up by the access to the genome, the species freely changes, redefines itself, its own coordinates. This prospect effectively emancipates humankind from the constraints of a finite species, from its enslavement to selfish genes. This emancipation, however, comes at a price. With interventions into man's genetic inheritance, the domination over nature reverts into an act of taking control over oneself, which changes our generic ethical self-understanding and can disturb the necessary conditions for an autonomous way of life and universalistic understanding of morals. How then should we react to this threat? Habermas's logic is here. Since the results of science pose a threat to our predominant notion of autonomy and freedom, one should curtail science. The price we pay for this solution is the fetishistic split between science and ethics. I know very well what science claims, but nonetheless, in order to retain the appearance of my autonomy, I choose to ignore it and act as if I don't know it. This prevents us from confronting the true question: how do these new conditions compel us to transform and reinvent the very notions of freedom, autonomy, and ethical responsibility? Science and technology today no longer aim only at understanding and reproducing natural processes, but at generating new forms of life that will surprise us. The goal is no longer just to dominate nature, the way it is, but to generate something new, greater, stronger than ordinary nature, including ourselves. Exemplary here is the obsession with artificial intelligence, which aims at producing a brain more powerful than the human brain. The dream that sustains the scientific technological endeavor is to trigger a process with no return, a process that would exponentially reproduce itself and go on, autonomously. The notion of second nature is therefore today more pertinent than ever, in both its main meanings. First, literally, as the artificially generated new nature, monsters of nature, deformed cows and trees, or, a more positive dream, genetically manipulated organisms, enhanced in the manner that suits us. Then, second nature in the more standard sense, of the autonomization of the results of our own activity, the way our acts elude us in their consequences, the way they generate a monster with a life of its own. It is this horror at the unforeseen results of our own acts that causes shock and awe, not the power of nature over which we have no control. It is this horror that religion tries to domesticate. What is new today is the short circuit between these two senses of second nature. Second nature in the sense of objective fate, of autonomized social process, is generating second nature in the sense of artificially created nature, of natural monsters. Namely, the process which threatens to run out of control is no longer just the social process of economic and political development, but new forms of natural processes themselves, from unpredictable nuclear catastrophes to global warming and the unimaginable consequences of biogenetic manipulation. Can one even imagine what would be the unprecedented result of the nanotechnological experiments, new life forms reproducing themselves out of control in a cancer-like way, for example? Here is a standard description of this fear. Within 50 to 100 years, a new class of organisms is likely to emerge. These organisms will be artificial in the sense that they will originally be designed by humans. However, they will reproduce and will evolve into something other than their original form. They will be alive under any reasonable definition of the word. The pace of evolutionary change will be extremely rapid. The impact on humanity in the biosphere could be enormous, larger than the Industrial Revolution, nuclear weapons, or environmental pollution. This fear also has its clear libidinal dimension. It is the fear of the asexual reproduction of life, the fear of an undead life that is indestructible, constantly expanding, reproducing itself through self-division. And, as always in the history of the last 2 millennia, the greatest master of exploiting this fear is the Catholic Church. Its predominant strategy today is that of trying to contain the scientific real within the confines of meaning. It is, as an answer to the scientific real, materialized in biogenetic threats, that religion is finding its new raison d'etre. Far from being effaced by science, religion, and even the syndicate of religions in the process of formation, is progressing every day. Lacan said that ecumenism was for the poor of spirit. There is a marvelous agreement on these questions between the secular and all the religious authorities, in which they tell themselves they should agree somewhere in order to make echoes equally marvelous, even saying that finally the secular is a religion like the others. We see this because it is revealed in effect that the discourse of science is partly connected with the death drive. Religion is planted in the position of unconditional defense of the living, of life in mankind, as guardian of life, making life an absolute. And that extends to the protection of human nature. This is what gives a future to religion through meaning, namely by erecting barriers to cloning, to the exploitation of human cells, and to inscribe science in a tempered progress. We see a marvelous effort, a new youthful vigor of religion in its effort to flood the real with meaning. The Church's message of hope thus relies on a pre-existing fear. It evokes and formulates the fear to which it then offers a solution of hope and faith. The life that it promises in its defense of the culture of life is not a positive life, but a reactive life, a defense against death. We are dealing here with the latest version of the fear first formulated in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The dilemma faced by many interpreters of Frankenstein concerns the obvious parallel between Victor and God, on the one side, and the monster and Adam on the other. In both cases, we are dealing with a single parent creating a male progeny in a non-sexual way. In both cases, this is followed by the creation of a bride, a female partner. This parallel is clearly indicated in the novel's epigraph, Adam's complaint to God. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay, to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? Paradise Lost, 10. It is easy to note the problematic nature of this parallel. If Victor is associated with God, how can he also be the Promethean rebel against God? Recall the novel's subtitle, or the modern Prometheus. The answer seems to be a simple one, spelled out by Shelley herself. Victor's sin is precisely that of presumption, of acting like God, engaging in an act of creation, of human life, the crown of the divine creation, which is and should remain the exclusive prerogative of God. If man tries to imitate God and do something for which he lacks qualifications, the result can only be monstrous. There is, however, also a different, Chestertonian reading. There is no problem here. Victor is like God precisely when he commits the ultimate criminal transgression and confronts the horror of its consequences, since God is also the greatest rebel, against himself, ultimately. The king of the universe is the supreme criminal anarchist. Like Victor, in creating man, God committed the supreme crime of aiming too high, of creating a creature in his own image, new spiritual life, precisely like today's scientists who dream of creating an artificially intelligent living being. No wonder that his own creature escaped his control and turned against him. So what if the death of Christ, of himself, is the price God has to pay for his crime? It is precisely within the domain of ecology that one can draw the line that separates the politics of emancipatory terror from the politics of fear at its purest. By far the predominant version of ecology is the ecology of fear, fear of a catastrophe, human-made or natural, that may deeply perturb, destroy even, human civilization. Fear that pushes us to plan measures to protect our safety. This fear and pessimism are, as a rule, fake, as pointed out by Hans-Georg Gadamer. The pessimist is disingenuous because he is trying to trick himself with his own grumbling. Precisely while acting the pessimist, he secretly hopes that everything will not turn out as bad as he fears. Does this same tension between the enunciated and the position of enunciation not characterize today's ecological pessimism? The more those who predict a catastrophe insist on it, the more they secretly hope the catastrophe will not occur. The first thing that strikes the eye apropos this fear is the way it remains conditioned by ideological trends. 2 decades ago, everyone, especially in Europe, was talking about Waldsterben, the dying of the forests. The topic was present on the covers of all popular weeklies. Now it has almost disappeared. Although concerns about global warming explode from time to time and are gaining more and more scientific credibility, ecology as an organized socio-political movement has, to a large degree, disappeared. Furthermore, ecology often lends itself to ideological mystifications. As a pretext for New Age obscurantisms, praising pre-modern paradigms and so forth, or for neo-colonialism, first-world complaints that the fast development of third-world countries like Brazil or China threatens us all. By destroying the Amazon rainforests, the Brazilians are killing the lungs of the earth. Or as an honorable cause for liberal communists. Buy green, recycle. As if taking ecology into account justifies capitalist exploitation. This ecology of fear has every chance of developing into the predominant form of ideology of global capitalism, a new opium for the masses replacing declining religion. It takes over the old religion's fundamental function, that of having an unquestionable authority which can impose limits. The lesson this ecology is constantly hammering away at is our finitude. We are not Cartesian subjects extracted from reality. We are finite beings embedded in a biosphere which vastly transcends our horizon. In our exploitation of natural resources, we are borrowing from the future, so we should start treating our Earth with respect, as something that is ultimately sacred, something that should not be totally unveiled, that should and will forever remain a mystery, a power we should trust, not dominate. While we cannot gain full mastery over our biosphere, it is unfortunately in our power to derail it, to disturb its balance, so that it will run amok, wiping us away in the process. This is why, although ecologists are all the time demanding that we radically change our way of life, underlying this demand is its opposite, a deep distrust of change, of development, of progress. Every radical change can have the unintended consequence of triggering a catastrophe. It is this distrust which makes ecology the ideal candidate for the hegemonic ideology, since it echoes the anti-totalitarian post-political distrust of large collective acts. One of the most effective fictional versions of this distrust is Stephen Fry's Making History, about a scientist traumatized by Hitler and the Nazi crimes who, in the 1950s, discovers a way to cross the time barrier and intervene in the past in a limited way. He decides to change the chemical composition of the stream from which the village of Hitler's parents was getting water, so that it renders women infertile. The experiment succeeds and Hitler is not born. However, when we switch into the alternate reality, the scientist discovers with horror what he has caused. Instead of Hitler, a more intelligent, upper-class, high-ranking officer led the Nazis to victory. The Nazis win the war and kill many more Jews than perished in the Holocaust, even obliterating the memory of their act. The scientist spends the rest of his life trying to intervene again in the past in order to undo the results of his first intervention and to return us to the good old world with Hitler. Such distrust was given a new impetus by biogenetics, which is on the verge of a crucial breakthrough. Up until now, geneticists were confined to tinkering and tweaking what nature had already produced, taking a gene from a bacterium, say, and inserting it into the chromosome of corn or pigs. What we're talking about is producing life that is wholly new, not in any way a genetic descendant of the primordial mother cell. The initial members of each newly created breed will have no ancestors at all. The genome itself of the organism will be artificially put together. First, individual biological building blocks are to be fabricated, then they are to be combined in an entirely new synthetic self-replicating organism. Scientists designate this new life form as Life 2.0. And what is so unsettling about it is that natural life itself becomes thereby Life 1.0. It retroactively loses its spontaneous natural character, becoming one in the series of synthetic projects. That is what the end of nature means. Synthetic life is not just supplementing natural life. It turns natural life into a confused, imperfect species of synthetic life. The prospects are, of course, breathtaking. From microorganisms which detect cancer cells and eliminate them, to whole factories which transform solar energy into usable fuel. However, the main limitation of this endeavor is no less obvious. The DNA of existing natural organisms is a mess of overlapping segments and junk that has no purpose scientists can fathom. So when geneticists tinker with this mess, they cannot ever be sure not only of the outcome, but also of how exactly this outcome was generated. The logical conclusion is thus to try to build new biological systems that are easier to understand because we made them that way. However, this project will work only if we fully accept the thesis that at least 90% of the human genome is junk DNA that has no clear function. The main function envisaged by scientists is that the junk serves as a guarantee against the danger of copying mistakes, a kind of backup copy. Only in this case, we can expect a project of getting rid of the repetitious junk and generating the organism only from its pure genetic formula to work. What if, however, the junk does play a crucial role, unknown to us because we were unable to grasp all the high-level complexity of the interaction of genes, which can only account for how, out of a limited, finite set of elements, an infinite, self-relating organic structure arises as an emergent property. Those who are opposed most ferociously to this prospect are religious leaders and environmentalists. For both, there is something of a transgression, of entering a prohibited domain, in this idea of creating a new form of life from scratch, from the 0 point. And this brings us back to the notion of ecology as the new opium of the masses. The underlying message is again a deeply conservative one. Any change can only be a change for the worse. Behind much of the resistance to the notion of synthetic life is the intuition that nature, or God, created the best of possible worlds. Charles Darwin believed that the myriad designs of nature's creations are perfectly honed to do whatever they are meant to do, be it animals that see, hear, sing, swim, or fly, or plants that feed on the sun's rays, exuding bright floral colors to attract pollinators. This reference to Darwin is deeply misleading. The ultimate lesson of Darwinism is the exact opposite, namely that nature tinkers and improvises, with great losses and catastrophes accompanying every limited success. Is the fact that 90% of the human genome is junk DNA with no clear function not the ultimate proof? Consequently, the first lesson to be drawn is the one repeatedly made by Stephen Jay Gould, the utter contingency of our existence. There is no evolution. Catastrophes, broken equilibria, are part of natural history. At numerous points in the past, life could have taken a turn in an entirely different direction. The main source of our energy, oil, is the result of a past cataclysm of unimaginable dimensions. Along these lines, terror means accepting the fact of the utter groundlessness of our existence. There is no firm foundation, place of retreat, on which one can safely count. It means fully accepting that nature does not exist, in other words, fully consummating the gap that separates the life world notion of nature and the scientific notion of natural reality. Nature acquired the domain of balanced reproduction, of organic deployment into which humanity intervenes with its hubris, brutally throwing its circular motion off the rails, is man's fantasy. Nature is already in itself second nature. Its balance is always secondary, an attempt to bring into existence a habit that would restore some order after catastrophic interruptions. The lesson to be fully endorsed is thus that of an environmental scientist who comes to the conclusion that while one cannot be sure what the ultimate result of humanity's interventions in the geosphere will be, one thing is sure. If humanity were to abruptly stop its immense industrial activity and let nature on Earth take its balanced course, the result would be a total breakdown, an unimaginable catastrophe. Nature on Earth is already so adapted to human interventions, human pollution is already so completely included in the shaky and fragile balance of natural reproduction on Earth, that its cessation would cause a catastrophic imbalance. This is what it means to say that humanity has nowhere to retreat to. Not only is there no big other, self-contained symbolic order as the ultimate guarantee of meaning, there is also no nature qua balanced order of self-reproduction, whose homeostasis is disturbed, nudged off course, by unbalanced human interventions. Not only is the big other barred, but nature too is barred. One should thus become aware not only of the limitation of the ideology of progress, but also of the limitation of the Benjaminian notion of the revolution as applying the emergency brake on the runaway train of progress. It is too late for that too. In his Reflections on the Edge of Askja, Páll Skúlason reports how he was affected by Askja, a volcanic lake and valley in the middle of Iceland, surrounded by snow-covered mountains. Askja is the symbol of objective reality, independent of all thought, belief, and expression, independent of human existence. It is a unique natural system within which mountains, lakes, and sky converge in a volcanic crater. Askja, in short, symbolizes the Earth itself. It is the Earth as it was, is, and will be, for as long as this planet continues to orbit in space, whatever we do and whether or not we are here on this Earth. Coming to Askja is like coming to the Earth itself for the first time, finding one's earthly grounding. Gilles Deleuze often played with the motif of how, in becoming post-human, we should learn to practice a perception as it was before men, or after, released from their human coordinates. Skúlason seems to be describing just such an experience, the experience of subtracting oneself from the immediate immersion into the surrounding world of objects which are ready at hand, moments of our engaged relationship with reality. Or is he? Let us take a closer look at what kind of experience he is rendering. The world suddenly strikes us in such a way that reality presents itself as a seamless whole. The question that then arises concerns the world itself and the reality that it orders into a totality. Is the world really a unified totality? Isn't reality just an infinitely variegated manifold of particular phenomena? One should be Hegelian here. What if this very experience of reality as a seamless whole is a violent imposition of ours, something we project onto it, to use this old, inappropriate term, in order to avoid directly confronting the totally meaningless, infinitely variegated manifold of particular phenomena, what Alain Badiou calls the primordial multiplicity of being? Should we not apply here the fundamental lesson of Kant's transcendental idealism? The world as a whole is not a thing in itself. It is merely a regulative idea of our mind, something our mind imposes on the raw multitude of sensations in order to be able to experience it as a well-ordered, meaningful whole. The paradox is that the very in itself of nature as a whole, independent of us, is the result of our subjective, synthetic activity. Do Skúlason's own words, if we read them closely, i.e. literally, not already point in this direction? Askja is used in this text as the symbol of a unique and important experience of the world and its inhabitants. There are numerous other symbols which men use to talk about the things that matter most. So, exactly as is the case with the Kantian sublime, the unfathomable presence of raw nature in itself is reduced to a material pretext, replaceable with others, for a unique and important experience. Why is this experience necessary? To live, to be able to exist, the mind must connect itself with some kind of order. It must apprehend reality as an independent whole, and must bind itself in a stable fashion to certain features of what we call reality. It cannot bind itself to the ordinary world of everyday experience, except by taking it on faith that reality forms an objective whole, a whole which exists independently of the mind. The mind lives, and we live, in a relationship of faith with reality itself. This relationship is likewise one of confidence in a detached reality, a reality which is different and other than the mind. We live and exist in this relationship of confidence, which is always by its nature uncertain and insecure. the relationship of confidence is originally and truly always a relationship with reality as a natural totality, as nature. One should note here the refined analysis of the tension between the inhabitable and the uninhabitable. In order to inhabit a small part of reality that appears within our horizon of meaning, we have to presuppose that reality in itself, different and other than the mind, which sustains our world, is part of reality as an ordered and seamless whole. In short, we have to have faith and confidence in reality. Nature in itself is not merely a meaningless composite of multiples, it is nature. What, however, if this relationship of faith and nature, in the primordial harmony between mind and reality, is the most elementary form of idealism, of reliance on the big other? What if the true materialist position starts, and in a way ends, with the acceptance of the in itself as a meaningless chaotic manifold? One is tempted here to turn again to Iceland's unique natural landscape, the magnificent misty green coastal plain in the south, scattered with large rocks covered with wet green-brown moss, cannot but appear as nature run amok, full of pathological cancerous protuberances. What if this is much closer to nature in itself than the sublime images of seamless wholes? Indeed, what we need is an ecology without nature. The ultimate obstacle to protecting nature is the very notion of nature we rely on. The true source of our problems is not the most significant event to affect Western culture during recent centuries, namely the breakdown of the relationship between man and nature, the retreat of the relationship of trust. On the contrary, this very relationship of faith with reality itself is the main obstacle that prevents us from confronting the ecological crisis at its most radical. That is to say, with regard to the prospects of an ecological catastrophe, it is too easy to attribute our disbelief in it to the impregnation of our minds by scientific ideology, which leads us to dismiss the sane concerns of our common reason, namely, the gut sense which tells us that something is fundamentally wrong with the scientific technological attitude. The problem is much deeper. It resides in the unreliability of our common sense itself, which, habituated as it is to our ordinary life world, finds it difficult to really accept that the flow of everyday reality can be perturbed. Our attitude here is that of the fetishistic split. I know very well that global warming is a threat to the entire humanity, but nonetheless, I cannot really believe it. It is enough to see the natural world to which my mind is connected. Green grass and trees, the sighing of the breeze, the rising of the sun. Can one really imagine that all this will be disturbed? You talk about the ozone hole, but no matter how much I look into the sky, I don't see it. All I see is the sky, blue or grey. The problem is thus that we can rely neither on the scientific mind nor on our common sense. They both mutually reinforce each other's blindness. The scientific mind advocates a cold, objective appraisal of dangers and risks involved, where no such appraisal is really possible, while common sense finds it hard to accept that a catastrophe can really occur. The difficult ethical task is thus to unlearn the most basic coordinates of our immersion into our life world. What usually served as the recourse to wisdom, basic trust in the background coordinates of our world, is now the source of danger. We should really grow up and learn to cut this ultimate umbilical cord to our life sphere. The problem with the science and technology attitude is not its detachment from our life world, but the abstract character of this detachment, which compels the science and technology attitude to combine itself with the worst elements of our life world immersion. Scientists perceive themselves as rational, able to appraise potential risks objectively. For them, the only unpredictable, irrational elements are the panic reactions of the uneducated masses. With ordinary people, a small and controllable risk can spread and trigger global panic, since they project onto the situation their disavowed fears and fantasies. What scientists are unable to perceive is the irrational, inadequate nature of their own cold and distanced appraisal. Contemporary science serves two properly ideological needs, for hope and censorship, which were traditionally taken care of by religion. Science alone has the power to silence heretics. Today, it is the only institution that can claim authority. Like the church in the past, it has the power to destroy or marginalize independent thinkers. From the standpoint of anyone who values freedom of thought, this may be unfortunate, but it is undoubtedly the chief source of science's appeal. For us, science is a refuge from uncertainties, promising, and in some measure delivering, the miracle of freedom from thought, while churches have become sanctuaries for doubt. Indeed, as Nietzsche put it more than a century ago, "Oh, how much is today hidden by science! Oh, how much it is expected to hide." However, we are not talking here about science as such, so the idea of science sustaining freedom from thought is not a variation on Heidegger's notion that science doesn't think. We are talking about the way science functions as a social force, as an ideological institution. At this level, its function is to provide certainty, to be a point of reference on which one can rely, and to provide hope. New technological inventions will help us against diseases, and so on. In this dimension, science is, in Lacanian terms, university discourse at its purest. S2, knowledge, whose truth is S1, master signifier, power. The paradox, effectively, is that today science provides the security which was once guaranteed by religion. And in a curious inversion, religion is one of the possible places from which one can develop critical doubts about contemporary society, one of the sites of resistance, as it were. Louis Dumont noted the paradox of cognitivist reduction naturalization. Man finally master of himself, recreating his own genome. But who is the agent here? The blind circuit of neurons? Here the tension between the enunciated content and the position of enunciation, what Foucault referred to as the transcendental empirical doublet, is pushed to an extreme point. The more the enunciated content is limited to an objective material process, the more the position of enunciation is reduced to a pure cogito, the void of an empty subject. This brings us to the problem of free will. Compatibilists such as Daniel Dennett have an elegant solution to the incompatibilists' complaints about determinism. When incompatibilists complain that our freedom cannot be combined with the fact that all our acts are part of the great chain of natural determinism, they secretly make an unwarranted ontological assumption. First, they assume that we, the self, the free agent, somehow stand outside reality, and then go on to explain how they feel oppressed by the notion that reality, with its determinism, controls them totally. This is what is wrong with the notion of us being imprisoned by the chains of natural determinism. We thereby obfuscate the fact that we are part of reality, that the possible local conflict between our free striving and external reality, resisting it, is a conflict inherent to reality itself. That is to say, there is nothing oppressive and constraining about the fact that our innermost strivings are predetermined. When we feel thwarted in our freedom by the constraining pressure of external reality, there must be something in us, some desires, strivings, which are thus thwarted, and where should these strivings come from if not from the same reality? Our free will does not in some mysterious way disturb the natural course of things. It is part and parcel of this course. For us to be truly and radically free, this would entail there being no positive content that we want to impose as our free act. If we want nothing external and particular given to determine our behavior, then this would involve being free of every part of ourselves. When a determinist claims that our free choice is determined, this does not mean that our free will is somehow constrained, that we are forced to act against our free will. What is determined is the very thing that we want to do freely, that is, without being thwarted by external obstacles.